Okay, everybody, we're going to talk about leaking clicker presses. We get calls occasionally from our customers and calls as well from other people needing service on their machines of other brands, and it seems to be a common issue between all brands of clicker press that sometimes there's just a very small, very pesky leak that kind of, despite best efforts, seems to slowly drip and cause a little bit of frustration. So we're just going to talk about maybe a few things that we can do to fix a leak in the event that it seems to be persistent and like you can't do anything to get rid of it. So first thing we're going to talk about is we're going to rule out a couple of more uncommon ones. In the construction of some of the cast bodies, there's usually a couple of plasma holes, kind of plasma cut holes in the intersection inside the press near the top that connects the wet basin to the dry basin. If it's leaking from there, that's kind of maybe something more serious going on, because it's kind of hard to create enough splashing to really come up and over there, over those, and then drop through the dry side, and then through the plasma cut holes in the bottom of the dry side. That's very uncommon, and if there is something going on there, then it's usually just evidence that there's something more serious going on. A hose that's spraying upward or something goofy like that. The other less common but more common than coming through those plasma cut holes is there's a circular metal plate bolted onto the bottom of the press. And that's just mainly a matter of being there for the construction of the press, and they basically just silicone it and bolt it onto the bottom once they're done making the press. And sometimes the silicone seal is a little bit bad, or one of the bolts is moved or something like that, and there's just a small leak coming through there. If there seems to be no evidence of the leak coming from anywhere else, yet you kind of see a little puddle developing underneath the press, then that might be evidence that it's coming from something like that. Again, those are the two more uncommon. We're going to talk about the more common types of leaks that we see on clicker presses, and that's almost always around the side access panels to the oil basin. And there's a few reasons for that. Cast bodies are imperfect, and so sometimes there's just like little imperfections in the cast body that create little humps or bumps or things that kind of prevent this rubber band seal from fully closing. And because most of these are made out of plastic, over tightening and under tightening, or just inconsistent tension on each one of those bolts, can sometimes simply be the cause. Over tightening can cause this humping in the band that can at the edges right here create a little path for the oil to just barely squeeze through on. Over tightening can also cause fracturing in the corners. You might see little micro fractures, or even along the sides as well, but those little fractures can create little paths for the oil to just barely squeeze by in. So it's with cast bodies like this, it's not always perfect. So there's a couple of things that we can do to reduce that. The first, we're about to make this standard in all of our presses, so this basically can be an instructional video for anyone we send this out to. Future customers will just have these pre-installed before they receive them. But a splash guard will basically, I'm going to show you how to install it in a second, but it will basically just catch the oil and refeed it back into the tank. And I'll show you how to cut that in a second, just once I've kind of shown you the inside of this and we're ready to close it up. The first thing I usually go to is the fill line for the oil, just making sure that there's enough oil in the tank. And basically what's happening here is the oil is returning at a very, very high high pressure through a fitting that's bolted into the bottom of this machined block that you see here. And so if the oil level, if the surface level is resting below that fitting, the fitting will shoot at a high speed and create splashing from the surface. Whereas if you fill high enough to cover the bottom of that fitting, it drastically, reduces the amount of splashing in the reservoir. So you don't have as much, hitting the side of this and trying to come through that seal. So usually my rule of thumb for this is basically I just fill as high as I can before I'm in danger of the oil coming through, this first set of drill and tapped holes for the cover. A half inch or so below that, will drastically reduce that amount of splashing. And other brands of clicker press are very similar to this as well. So filling like this can also kind of save you the headache on those other brands as well. But if all else fails, we basically take a rubber sheet, a splash guard like this, and because these holes here are plasma cut, there are some inconsistencies. So I'm just going to show you exactly how to install these. Basically, you just want to take the top 3 holes and you want to put the bolts through those holes. And just as a placeholder, you can kind of stick it up here and just loosely thread them in just to keep this rubber sheet in place here. And then I'm going to take a razor blade and I'm going to go back and I'm just going to find the top corner here, and I'm going to make a cut along the top edge as a reference point, and then I'm going to kind of pull it away and I'm going to drag it all the way out. And I'm going to do the same on this side that's going to be a little harder for the camera to see. I'm going to make that same cut, and then I'm going to pull it all the way out to the edge. So basically, I'll show you the concept for the camera just before we put the actual cover on. But basically what we're doing here is we're going to install this under the cover, and it's a little bit difficult because you have to slide under the pressure sensor and the hoses down there. But we're going to shove this whole thing in there. And this way, when the oil splashes to this side, the overhang here and the overhang here and the overhang here will allow the oil to simply catch and then slide away from the panel. So at this point, all we do is we take the panel, we remove these bolts one at a time, and then just basically re-feed them through both the panel as well as that splash guard, and then reattach in the top here. We'll do the same thing here. Can just take a minute to get the alignment right. Okay, and then at the point once you get this mounted up here, obviously, you'll tighten it down, but then you can just take a razor blade and you can, trace along this outer edge and just cut the excess of that splash guard off. Yeah, that'll definitely take care of any, splashing that you or any leaking that you have coming through these panels.